Hi, good afternoon. This is a meeting of the Budget Committee of the BET. The first item on our agenda, and I'm sorry for those visitors, it's an executive session to discuss pending litigation. We will try to keep that short, but if you could give us a few rooms, non-BET members, to wait out in the hallway for us. Can I have a motion to move into executive session?
I move that we,
So Kathy, we exited at 5:01, 5:21. Right. First item on our agenda is ED5, which is an additional appropriation for mechanical system upgrades for $272,000. If you'd like to come down to the table and the microphone, that'd be helpful for the Board of Ed.
Good evening.
Hi, Dan.
So first off, I'd like to say that we have done some reviews today, and there was some additional funds available. So we were able to knock the request down to $246,245.78. And this just, 246, 245.78.
Let's say 246 even. Is that
That's
all right?
fine. That's fine. So I can revise the documents before, but this really just came up in the last hour or so that we were able to confirm that.
Okay. So you provided the explanation. You have two boilers which are not reliable for providing the heating system heat for the upcoming season and
Correct.
need immediate emergency repair. Does the repair extend the life of the boilers?
It does. We've talked to the company who's doing the repair, MCOR, and they've said quite emphatically that you're looking at least a 10-year extension, probably 10 to 15-year extension on that. The boilers themselves are in very good shape. They were very expensive to purchase. They were top of the line. This is according to our consultant, the manufacturer. The contractor. And by changing these tubes out, yes, you're definitely going to extend the life of the boilers.
And just to understand the request, and then I'll let Mr. Mason ask us questions. You need the repair on boiler number 1.
Correct.
You are asking for appropriation for boiler number 2, but
Correct.
you'll make that determination once you have completed boiler number 1, are relying on that for the heat.
Correct.
And then we'll assess whether you require
And the reason for
funds.
that is the boilers are of the same, they were installed at the same time, manufactured at the same time, basically utilize the same amount. They're in a lead lag configuration, meaning one goes on first a certain amount of time, then the second one goes on, and then that switches. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but technically the same amount of usage.
Okay. Mr. Mason, you had some questions?
No, I think, I'm sorry, I don't have a voice. A lot of people might like that. I had sent in some question and you answered that. I guess the question is I don't know, it was actually directed towards Roland. Do we have other open items from previous budgets that are not committed to apply to this?
I don't know about.
Piping, chiller pipe, they're in the book.
There was a 17-18 project with retubing the boilers at Greenwich High School.
Okay,
And that's what I was referring to, that there was money available from that line item. 18,
okay.
line item 18164. There was a line in there for retubing the boilers for $50,000. There's also chiller replacement at $450,000, I believe.
Okay, so the idea is trying to clean up the older,
The chiller replacement is being designed right now. We should probably go out for bid July or February for that.
But-
and test.
But this kind of gets to that question that we had last year, which if we want to be pure about only allowing projects appropriations to be allocated to the scope of work indicated in the CIP sheet, then you would only be able to look back and look for GHS boiler projects to say, is there available funds? And Roland did find, and you found that there was one appropriation of fiscal 18 for $50,000.
The moral of the story is, I think the moral of the story is, we're looking for a improved system going forward, thinking this through. The other thing I have is, are these on a service contractor with anyone?
No.
So it's you and your team
We
deciding?
have a service contract.
For a breakdown.
Recently, we have a service contract, not a maintenance contract. We brought in MCOR as our on-call HVAC maintenance contractor. If you're asking me if we have a true maintenance agreement to just service these boilers on a regular basis, not as of yet, no.
So let me try it another way. So these aren't the only two boilers that you own.
That's correct.
You got a few over all the schools.
Yep.
How can you monitor and oversee this? It's got to be brutal. So just thinking different, especially as we approach February, because we have a lot of conversations in February. Is this something that we should start thinking about? An external maintenance, a true
Absolutely.
maintenance contract?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've discussed that several times. When I came on board, and I'm not saying it's me, but I said it's going to take me 18 months to 2 years to really feel my way around and be comfortable with how we should proceed. I've been here for 2 years and a month, and absolutely, I think a maintenance agreement for a lot of the systems, not just boilers, but the HVAC, fire alarm systems, the works. We have a very good group of tradesmen. It's a very small group.
So-
I have two mechanics that
Right.
I would consider HVAC savvy. I have 13 schools, and I can't tell you how many tons of air conditioning that is, or how many BTUs. of heat.
So if I may, does this process goes to the full BET, good conversation, goes to the RTM, they get to hear this conversation. We've been talking about capital asset management for a while. It's things like this that are going to help us get there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not to say that we're not maintaining the boilers.
No,
It's-
it's nothing like that.
And most of the boilers, I think, have been replaced within the last 15 years or so. These were installed, the boilerplate was July 1993, so they're right there. So we actually had them being replaced in next year's capital to the tune of about $1.5 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's what you were thinking.
Yeah.
You said these are from 1994, 1995, and that you were scheduled to replace them both in 2022.
And that was basically, the replacement was based on age alone. It wasn't due to any kind of inspection. That was a review by KG&D for their master plan.
Right.
But reviewing it with the gentleman who was doing the repairs for MCOR, there's some good life left in these, and he recommended we retube rather than even look at replacing. He's the one who mentioned you've got at least 10 years left in these.
It would be helpful to us if I know that you're looking at the capital plan now, and the Board of Ed if you can adjust your fiscal 22 year to push that project out further, so it represents what you would spend. Ms. Tarkington.
I guess so MCOR, that contract had been bid out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So there are a couple of different things in these numbers, or about 3 different things that I'm a bit confused about. If MCO was bid out, why wasn't it bid out at the state rates? And so why is there an adjustment for each of these above the $99,000? I would think if MCO is doing the work, they would have bid appropriately on their own contract. Is that not true? I mean, why is there a differential there?
You're asking why there was an increase for the...
Right. Right. Because I would think if, in order to sign the first contract, it would have had to been at the state rates. Is that not correct?
I can't answer that right now for you. I will get back to you. on
Yeah,
that.
I think it's important to get back because the number is quite substantial between, whatever, it's $198,000.
It was a
and-
roughly, I think it was roughly a $20,000 increase per unit.
Right. So I couldn't understand that if MCOR was a bid contract. And so that's my first question. My second question is, I talked with Roland earlier, and he indicated that we have $50,000 left. You were supposed to, the BOE was to do the work, and Roland disappeared on us, but 2 years ago, and the money was available. It's still available. So why aren't you deducting the full 50,000? Because I took 198,000. I grossed it up for the 10% contingency. I subtracted 50,000, and I came up with a number of 168,900. So why aren't you
There's
taking the full $50,000?
There's an
when
encumbrance of $9,895 already on that line, and I'm sorry, I don't have that with me, what
But
that
the
is for.
encumbrance, it's the approval, the CIP was to have $50,000 for these boilers at GHS, so there still should be that $50,000, and I think the number
Unless the
exceeds it.
unless the number encumbered was used for something dealing with the boiler retubing, which I
Okay,
believe
so
it
you'll
was.
follow up on that second
Yeah,
point.
absolutely.
Okay, great. And then my third point is, I really don't, while I support the 10% project contingency, clearly, I don't support having money in here for BOE employees. I think that's a different part of our budget, and I don't think that we should have to be adding this $1,450.78 for BOE employees. I think that's, should be in the operating and, whatever. So,
Well, if you want me to answer that,
Yeah.
I feel kind of the same way about it, except if they are doing work, let's just say they're doing work because this is an emergency basis, if their time is spent assisting these gentlemen, fixing it, then their time doing work on other assignments has been removed. So that's my give and take on it. It's $1,400. Can we lose that? Sure, we can pull it out of operating.
I think it's a little
But the
petty.
original request was, order of magnitude, that's what we figured out.
Okay, so why don't you just come back on, I'd still say all 3 points, please. Thank you for letting me that.
Sure.
Sorry about this.
It would seem to me, I'd agree on that last point, that incremental costs, if you're paying overtime potentially that you wouldn't have otherwise, may be appropriate to attribute to the capital project, but just straight salary, I don't think that's something that the additional appropriation should cover. You're paying their salary as part of your operating budget. So if you said you could agree with that, that maybe we reduce the
I
dollar
just want you to
amount.
understand my reason for it is you are taking them away from, their daily activities.
Right.
So,
But you're not hiring somebody else
Nope.
to do that work.
Nope.
So it's not an incremental cost to you.
right.
There is an opportunity cost, absolutely. Okay. Mr. Raymer.
Yeah, on the last page of your handout, the one that looks like a grid like this, Dan, could you just turn that from, I'm not sure I understood what the last column was. What the column to the far right was.
We originally gotten pricing, this is something that Ms. Tarkington was alluding to. We had originally gotten the pricing for the replacement from MCOR of $99,000.
Right.
And we hit the prevailing wage number if we went over that. So we had never asked them for prevailing wage rates. That second number includes the prevailing wage rates.
It's a 30% increase, more or less. It's a 30%
Yes.
increase.
Yep.
I mean, that's a pretty big kick up. But that's not what you're asking us for, is it? Or I have different sets of numbers here. So on this last page, I have with the wages included, I have the $220,000 figure. I got the 286. On your cover sheet, you're talking about 272. So I'm a little confused. Your, on page 2, you talk about also the 22350. That matches the second column, I mean,
Right.
the column to the left on the last page.
Correct.
But I got at least 3 sets of numbers. But what you're saying to me now is that the actual number without the, with the wages, and you're going to pull out the wages, the 1,400 wages, you're saying is 246? And that's 246, it's going to decrease maybe by $1,450?
Correct. So it should be right around right around,
244,795.
thank you.
So 245, since we're rounding, right?
We can approve 245.
So 245 is what you're asking us for. And
Correct.
you're asking us for that, assuming that you have to do the pipes on both. And I understood everything you just said about the fact that there's 2 identical pieces of equipment that have been used in an identical way. Why would one have the problem, the other one wouldn't have the problem? So when you've gotten the money and the guy's ready to start, you're going to shut down boiler number 1, and boiler number 2 is going to work alone for a while.
We've already started that operation.
Okay, so
correct.
it's working alone right now.
Yes.
So how far away are you from opening up boiler number 2 to see what you've got there and doing the pressure testing on the tubes there?
About 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks
Right.
away.
The new tubes will arrive on site this Thursday. They've already started dismantling the old tubes and getting it ready for new tubes in boiler number 1. So we are heating the building with 1 unit.
And what happens to this funding if, surprise, surprise, when you take a look at boiler number 2, for whatever crazy reason, you don't have the problem?
It doesn't get used.
It doesn't get used. It's,
Well, except that I don't know that then I don't end up with using it for, that it gets left, like the 50,000 is from 2016, et cetera, it gets left out there as an appropriated sum, which I'd really, I almost rather than have you come back to us about the other boilers. Would that work?
yes, we can do anything you'd like to. I just don't want to hold up any.
I don't want to hold up your
I
work
wouldn't-
either.
We would proceed with the work no matter
And
what,
it
but
seems
it's
to
just a
me-
matter of
it seems to me
dollars
from-
being.
From everything you said to me, it seems to me really unlikely that I'm going to get a serendipity on boiler number 2.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
I mean,
doesn't seem.
I got it.
We're already starting to see leakage, from, being overtaxed. So you've got some water on the floor that shows signs of cracks in it.
And
How often are these boilers inspected in this way? So you've done this inspection, when was it last inspected?
The
in this way?
boilers are inspected by the insurance company on a yearly basis. I don't know how thorough that is, but
Yeah,
as
they're
far
really
as.
looking for fire risk, I guess.
Exactly.
Flood.
So as far as how often they inspected for testing,
Yeah.
they're going to be inspected a lot more now throughout the district.
You don't do a seasonal test in the fall on this equipment?
They do
before
a
it's fired up?
seasonal test. I mean, it's rudimentary at best. They may, I'm not there overseeing it, but they'll, the first thing you're going to see is, is there water on the floor that when the tubes are filled? That's a really good indication you've got cracks and
Is this a
scaling.
forced hot air system, or is this a circulated hot water? What is this?
Circulated hot water.
Circulated hot water.
I just want to, I know Ms. Tarkington has a question, but
Sorry.
just to leave the impression, I would not concur with Mr. Raymer's suggestion to
Wasn't
reduce
quite a
this.
suggestion yet.
Only because
Okay.
it requires RTM appropriation,
Oh.
and there's a timing problem.
Okay.
And I think
Good point.
we need to be responsive to what they're requesting. I would say during the budget process, and I know this came up previously, and it wasn't a suggestion I supported at the time, but I'm rethinking that. And that is, do we need an emergency repair fund that's at the condition by the BET? It's, I think, worth discussing if the RTM agrees as an approach that the BET would have available, because if this occurred later in the year, like in May, when there wasn't available operating funds, there would be a problem at the Board of Ed to get this job done without a lot of special meetings. But that's not for discussion tonight. But I think it's appropriate to ask for the full amount for both. If they don't need it, it gets returned, and we will,
Okay. I wasn't quite
institute the
making the
process.
suggestion yet. I was exploring
Right.
possibilities.
but,
That's a good point.
okay. Ms. Tarkington?
Yeah, I just have one follow-up point because Roland is back with us. So, Roland, the $50,000 that was in, I thought it was a mechanical systems upgrade in 2018, 18184. The sheet I have, and I admit it's old, it's October 18th, there's 998,000 availability. Is that what you have? Oh, you know, you can just check this, because I think the three numbers Dan was going to check, but the number for the Greenwich High School was $50,000. And so, what?
50,000 for the retubing.
50,000, so that's, I just wanted to come, because I think Dan said there wasn't $50,000 left.
But the numbers jive. So
The
from
numbers jive?
Well, let me just connect what I see as the numbers. If the request is not what the amount is on our cover sheet, the request is really 286,351. Mr. Watson lowered it to 246. That's the 9,000 he said he believes is encumbrance on the GHS boiler retubing. He believes is out there, and we'll follow up on to determine.
Correct.
Right.
But from the
But I asked
240,
Roland.
it doesn't make sense, the 272 doesn't get you to that 9,000 delta. So there was a mistake on the cover page.
So, no, I wasn't doing it that way, Leslie, I was doing it
Okay.
a different way. But again, I am not at that number, I'm at a number that's more like 168,900. Again, the 99,000 for each boiler, I do support both boilers, the 10% contingency minus the 50,000 or whatever number that Roland shows is left, but
So
this
you're
morning
not-
he said it was 50,000.
So you're not using the prevailing wage
No, I'm not
rates?
using prevailing wage because the MCOR contract initially should have been at the prevailing wage, and I need to understand more, and I think Mr. Watson said he was going to come back with more information. So, no, but I
Okay.
am at 168, 900,000, which
So
is,
just to, we'll get clarification on the number for Monday. However, even if we approve the higher number now, and that's not the appropriate number, that money will get, the appropriation gets returned to us if it's not used for this particular contract. So
I'd
like-
rather go with a lower number and add additional on Monday, if that's, once Dan comes back. Mr. Watson
I'd
comes
rather
back
go
and-
the other way, so I'm going to make a motion to approve the additional appropriation for $245,000. So that incorporates the prevailing wage rate, it incorporates a 10% contingency, it does not include the opportunity cost for the Board of Ed employees.
So I'll second your motion, just so it's on the floor.
Before we vote, I have a question for Dan, if I may.
Ms. Raymer?
So tell me again then how we're arriving at the 129,500. I recognize this, the 99,500 increased by 30%. I'm trying to understand why the prevailing wage rate change produces a 30% change in the quote from the vendor.
Number one, I don't control the prevailing wage. I don't have his, I only have his original bid with me, sorry.
I think you said his original bid was the 99,500.
Original bid was 99.5.
And that bid was on Halloween? No? On the 31st of October, no?
The 99,000 was on October 24th. The prevailing wage rate was received,
Maybe I'm not understanding what it means when you say the prevailing wage rate. How does that work?
how does it work?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dan, I don't mean to be making you uncomfortable here. I'm trying to understand how I go from a contractor who talks about 99,500, but we need to have a quote at 30% more. 30% is a big increment. And it was quoted to us at 99,500 on the 24th of October.
If you didn't have to, weren't obligated to use prevailing wage, you could get this job done for 99,000.
Again, I can't understand this because we already sent the MCOR contract out to bid, and we accepted MCOR. It should have been at prevailing wage, so why wouldn't they have bid it as the underlying contract to begin with? This is why I think we
Mr.
need to
Watson
have,
will
he's coming
he'll
back.
look at it and answer
Right.
that question, but.
But I
so we
do,
don't-
I also agree that 30% more, I agree with Jeff, the 30% more seems very high for the differential.
Or the
very
30% less was a real good number, but we don't have a control over that.
So is there a way for you to verify? So
The
you asked
prevailing wage
contractor-
rates?
Yes.
Absolutely there is. Absolutely.
So I think, I mean, I probably would be, I mean, I trust you, Dan. If you would go through the process of, you've checked on the rates, et cetera, and these are the correct rates on the state contract.
Sure.
And
Do that.
confirm that to us on Monday, I would be prepared to vote for this on Monday at your 245,000. But I would like that double check, because it just, I don't know, I mean, I don't know exactly how it works, but a 30% increase does seem like a large number. Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
Sorry to give you a hard time.
No problem.
So I would like this committee, though, to indicate whether it supports the appropriation or not.
I'm gonna support it.
I know that we will have additional information, so the number could change on Monday, but can I have a vote for those in favor of the $245,000 for emergency repairs to the high school boilers?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Mason? Yes. Ms. Tarkington?
Abstain. I'm going to wait for the
Abstain,
numbers
so
and my responses.
301. I would suggest, I know that you have to submit this for the RTM call by Friday at noon. Can I suggest you just take a look at the description so that some of the questions that came up here potentially aren't then raised during that RTM process?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
You can get your information back to us sooner than next
Yeah, I'll
Monday,
try to have
too.
it to you tomorrow, because I've got nothing else going on.
No, I got it. I don't
Yeah,
want to miss the deadline.
he's allowed to withdraw. It does get publicly distributed.
Okay, that's right.
But
Okay,
yes.
that works. All right. Thank you.
So the next item on our agenda is ED7. What happened to ED6? Are the numberings okay?
Yeah, ED6 was just used for internally.
Okay. ED7, I didn't notice it till just now, for the Board of Ed release of conditions on the new phone system. If you'd like to come forward, Dr. Jones again, and Mr. Ting.
So helpful on the previous slide.
So we appreciate you being here. Thank you for taking the time. So this is, as I said, a release of conditions. During the budget process, the condition that the BET placed on this was subject to review and acceptance of the RFP which should have input from the town IT department. And I didn't mean to open up a problem, but I think we wanted to confirm that the condition was met. So we did forward the question to Mr. Klein today of whether the RFP was reviewed and had input. And Mr. Ting, I'll let you tell us how it's prepared and what the structure of the contract is.
Okay, so as you stated last year, the Board of Education stated a need to upgrade its antiquated telephone system. The funding for this project was conditioned to be subject to review and acceptance of the RFP, which should have input from the town's IT department. The RFP included in today's packet was completed with input from Mr. Klein in town IT. It is our hope that it will be approved so that we can begin work towards the modernization of the school's phone systems.
So the one comment or the question was the linking of the hardware with the carrier. So as explained to me, we've got hardware and software like our phones. You buy a phone and you buy a carrier. I believe the towns, when it went out to bid, separated those two pieces, and your RFP combines them. And you said you did that on advice of your consultant.
Yes, so the Board of Education did hire a consultant this past summer to help us prepare the phone system RFP. At that time, we were advised to have the winning bidder who would have access to the highest quality of service at the most reasonable cost to perform the quote-unquote rate shopping for us in order to get the best pricing, excuse me, as opposed to us going out and doing that on our own.
So, Mr. Klein, you did it differently. I'm sure that there are different approaches to how this work can get done.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so I would say that the information I didn't know was that there was a telephone consultant, that a telephone consultant will manage the project, so check. I think that's, works for me. And if the telephone consultant recommends that approach, then that seems reasonable as well. And, so as long as a consultant had thought that through, I think I'm fine with it.
Okay. Ms. Tarkington?
So I want to come back to the lengthy discussions we had at our Budget Committee meeting about this when we were discussing this back in February. I don't know, were you present at those discussions, Mr. Ting?
Yes,
On the Board of Education Day?
I was at the
Yeah.
BET all-day meeting, yes.
So, we did talk about it. One of the things we talked in length, and again, we talked about it both on the day, Consolidation Day, and again at the Budget Committee approval date, and then again at the full BET approval date. So we had several different discussions on this telephone system. If you go back to when Mr. Klein installed, or whatever you call it, implemented the CIP plan for the town, it was after very lengthy review and discussions with a consultant, which included all the work for the BOE, for the common system between the town and the BOE. And I believe Bob Brady, Mr. Brady, handled all of those discussions for the BET and coordinating, and I think there were others involved too, but I don't remember that. He always seemed to have a lead on it. So, the whole objective of this was to have the commonality between the systems, not a separate BOE system. The reason the BOE did not go onto the system when the town approved that system, as I remember it, was because the BOE had recently put in a new telephone system, and we didn't want to double the expenditure. But the intent was to continue to have the commonality. So there's a couple different things here. I want to come back, and I did go back to both the CIP sheet on this. I went back to some of our own minutes on this, and also to the budget amendment forms that we all submitted on this. And I just want to make sure that we truly are coordinating and that this is going to work. And also, I read your document here. Is this the document that goes out for the RFP? Or
Yes, it is.
It is. So what surprised me in the document that would go out for the RFP here is there are a couple of different things that surprised me. I couldn't understand the numbers under the table describing approximate scope of work. It looks like there's at least 1,322 telephones or whatever. And then, again, the number of user licenses for each location seem to be like 2,900. So, again, substantially more than number of persons in the BOE, or, almost could be the town and the BOE together, but maybe this is appropriate. I don't think Mr. Klein has had the time to really look at this, so I don't want to put him on the spot. But then what surprised me was the very short time frames of setting this out to bid, and maybe that's appropriate or not, but sending it over the Thanksgiving holidays, and then having these submission requirements seemed to be a bit short. But what then surprised me was the budget, that we're telling these various and sundry vendors the budget. The Board of Education budget for this project is listed in the Town of Greenwich Capital Plan 2019-20, available on the town's website. It's one thing if they go searching for it. It's number two if you actually direct them to go look and see how much money we have for this plan. After that, I got a little frustrated but as I look through it. But it also talks about providing a system that can provide for growth for the next 7 years. I would also say provide a system that could also be, modified. Maybe we want to make it smaller, not bigger, if this, whatever, circumstances. So, again, my concern on this is really making sure that if it makes sense to have these coordinated phone systems, that you really are working with our chief technology officer for the town, and that this does make sense, since our phone system was moved into his department, and I think he had to implement the whole thing, as I remember, but, and then I also wanted to come back.
Okay, before you go on, just to identify the question.
The question is,
That I heard is, one is, will the two systems be able to work together?
right,
Or is that not a reasonable goal?
I don't think that's a reasonable goal. Had I been here when this was originally put forward, I wouldn't have. I don't see any value in putting having two essentially distinct entities with two distinct networks and support people for that network attempting to share a single telephone system, which relies heavily on networks and the protocols and how those are supported. So the only value or the only argument I heard for having the systems unified was to have 5-digit dialing between the two entities, which can be accomplished between two independent systems.
Which is on page 3 under project scope.
right, I did read that.
So before we
honest.
move that off, I mean, that's an important point that I think different people had different perspectives on. I want to make sure all Budget Committee members or BET members don't have a follow-up question, that we're being told by the people closest to the system to say that it's probably not advantageous to have one large system, that it's acceptable to have two systems that certainly you can call each other.
Unnecessary.
All right. Any follow-up question to that, Mr. Mason?
I don't think that, I don't think that's the question. I think the question is, we have a certain demand for phones in the town of Greenwich. We have a certain demand for equipment and operating and maintenance upkeep, getting new people in, getting people off, fixing technical questions that pop up. How much are we buying as a town between, let's go back 2 years ago. How much does it cost us to run our phone system? 2 years later, we have all this new technology. We have still two separate entities doing that. Does it cost us less to operate the phone system for both? Does it cost more? In other words, I think that's what the goal was, to try to find efficiency. I'm told on this side that it's really complicated, program the phones, it's a full-time, entity keeping all, okay, that's great. And you probably have the same headaches. But had we had commonality, had we had a single source, say, training on how people work this and how we handle issues that come up day to day, could we, as a town, could we reduce the cost of running the phone systems for the town? Technology should be helping us. And then from a management point of view, and that's where we're looking for the unity. That's where the unity was born.
I thought Tom was answering that mostly.
Yeah, I think so. What I'm saying is that the phone system itself, the way we run it, is completely embedded into our data network, which the town IT department supports. So we have our own switches, we have our own fiber optic. It's completely embedded, and to then try to run, from my perspective, trying to manage phones from a completely different network in a completely different entity is not practical, especially with the level of resources I have now. So when I looked at it, and I think the same would be true from Mike's perspective, to try to support a phone system over here from one central area presents the same exact problem. So you have two distinct networks. The phone system is dependent on the network, and then trying to support from a central place two very different networks, where either way you slice it, one of us doesn't know anything about the other one's network. Is very problematic.
I agree with that statement.
Yeah.
But not for the reason you agree with.
Okay.
That may not help me.
I mean, I'm concerned here because one of the things I thought we were looking for was efficiencies between the town and the BOE. And where we could get the efficiencies, we were going to head in that direction. And that we didn't want to have the redundancies, whatever. And so I do know that during the budget process, which wasn't that long ago, it was February, there was discussions about the scope and, the vendors and having some commonality and therefore having the BOE work with the town to make sure that it was going to at least head in that direction. And also that, as Mr. Mason has just said, the defined maintenance responsibilities, understanding where we could have those efficiencies in terms of the maintenance of the systems and so forth. What I see here is an autonomy that, will not necessarily, Tom says it will work. We've put Tom in a very difficult position here because he didn't know anything about this a couple hours ago. And he gave us the courtesy of coming to this meeting, so I thank you very much. But I do think, so I think he was kind of put on the spot when Leslie asked the questions. But I don't think it really, this program projects the spirit of what was intended when the original Brady study and whoever was involved, very expensive study was done, and the opportunity to make more efficient systems. So, and I think this needs to be reviewed. I also would recommend that the document really be reviewed by Tom, which perhaps he'd have time prior to Monday to look at that, and to, give some suggestions and input to make sure that if this is the direction we're headed, that there aren't things that would make the systems more
Leslie, when the
efficient.
need for this was presented, it was put forth from the point of view that the Board of Education's telephone systems are aging and prone to failure. We have 5 schools on the eastern side of town that are vulnerable right now. Eastern Middle School, ISD, North Mianus, Old Greenwich, and Riverside. That side of town used to have 2 telephone circuits keeping their telephone systems running. Because those circuits are old copper, one of them has failed, and we don't have backup if the other one fails. So the money that was requested, the $1.35 million, was to fix this aging phone system and bring it up to reliable standards. We discussed at Greenwich High School, the phone system there was put in 30, 40 years ago using all analog copper lines. It is so old that the vendor that put it in place is no longer in business. And if critical pieces of it were to fail, spare parts are not available. I'm not exaggerating when I say that's an accident waiting to happen.
Let me just add something here, only because, going back to those discussions, I think we were looking to get the benefit of the town's experience as a Board of Ed went out for this project. And part of what we're hearing today is that this project, it's not like you're laying copper lines that are independent of the data networks you already have. These phone systems rely on your built-in Wi-Fi capability and networks and switches and everything, all the equipment you have, which are currently separate between the two. This isn't the project to start saying we're going to combine them.
And
This
I also-
project overlays what you already have. So I'm not hearing synergies on that we should be buying the same thing the town has or whatever. Plus, we have the obligation to go out to bid because it's a large contract going out. So you can't just give it to the same system that the town had. So some of your questions and your concerns on how you implement this and if we should have a combined telephone support department, that's a different question than it is the hardware piece of it. And we've heard last year the immediate need that they have to move forward on this project, and I'm hearing it again tonight.
Well, I certainly agree with, that's why we, put it into the budget. But we also had discussions that went beyond this And so that's what, it's disappointing that we can have discussions as recently as February, and, by November, they're forgotten, to be honest.
I disagree with that
And
characterization.
so, we can check the minutes. So I just, again, I think that it should be reviewed by Tom, and especially separating the,
I'm confused because
It's my
it
understanding,
was
Mr.
reviewed.
Klein, Tom read the RFP, it was submitted to him, his comments were submitted back to the Board of Ed, who integrated, I believe, all of them, most of them.
Town IT had 8 points, and we incorporated all 8 of them.
All those points.
Yeah,
So
I think I just didn't know that that happened. So that's probably the only
So they're in
piece
here. The one comment that I would agree on is I would take out that section about the budget. There's no reason that you should point your bidders to your budget on the project.
Okay, I was actually advised to put it in there because the numbers were public knowledge, but I can take it out.
I would, they're there,
Make
but
them
they.
work for
Exactly. Any other discussion?
I was only going to mention that my recollection was a little different than Mrs. Tarkington's. I remember there being a conversation that we wanted to be sure that the people at the school's administration availed themselves of the expertise of Tom, and that seems to have happened. I was around here, been around here long enough that I remember when we were first looking at the phone systems at the town side, and we had some grand dream for a little while there that we would do it all together, both schools and town side, and quickly learned that that wasn't going to work, frankly, because the school system at that point didn't need to be replaced, as I recall. And so we went ahead with the other. We were thinking, I think, in terms that you could get a much better price if you had a much better project. I don't even know if that's the case. I'm heartened to hear from Tom now that from his view, even if you were doing the whole thing right now, you wouldn't do one grand system to cover both of them. There's very little to be gained and a whole lot of headaches to try and achieve it. So, I think that answers some of the questions right there. I have no idea whether or not this is the perfect way to approach it or something, but I'm satisfied that you've done what we asked you to do, and
Thank you.
certainly would support that.
So,
Ms.
so I'm just going to read from our approved minutes from the BET decision date when we put on the condition. It said, reason, prior to installing its current telephone system, the town had a professional study prepared with townwide data analysis of all department requirements and needs. The study concluded the importance of having a consistent telephone system townwide. The BOE is requesting funds to install a new telephone system. The amendments address the goal of installing a compatible system with the town and control of the project. So I just, because of Mr. Raymer's comments, then I just wanted to make sure that that I just put that out there. Before, I don't think I was that direct.
So, Mr. Raymer, would you like to make a motion to release the conditions on the Board of Ed?
Yes, thank you. I
Phone
would do that.
system project?
I'd make that motion.
I'll second that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Mason, yes. Ms. Harkington?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
4-0. Yes?
Yes, 4-0. It passes. So it goes to
you.
the. it
Thank
goes
you
to the
very much.
Full BET. Thanks. The next item on our agenda is Nathaniel Witherell 2, which is a release of conditions on the contribution to the Nathaniel Witherell Special Revenue Fund. At the March budget meeting, the BET put a condition on Nathaniel Witherell's, the funding for that the town provides the Special Revenue Fund to get a report on the recommendations and implementation of, from the consultants that had been hired by the BET through the special project team, the Strategic Planning Committee. And the deadline was October 31st. Nathaniel Witherell, board chair, has submitted that report. It's attached to the agenda for review. I did not ask Nathaniel Witherell Management and board chair to come to today's meeting. There's been a lot of demands on their time, and there's a lot of moving parts with the Nathaniel Witherell. I think the BET, members of the BET may like to discuss the specifics of the report, and I didn't believe all members of the BET would be able to be in attendance at tonight's meeting. If issue of whether we vote to release the conditions tonight or it waits to a future meeting, I think is, we don't have time pressure on it. The town makes that contribution towards the end of the fiscal year. We have discussions with Nathaniel Witherall's management and board during the February budget meetings. We have the ongoing work of the strategic planning committee. So I believe they've met the wording of the condition. However, my colleagues would prefer that we don't act on this tonight. If we wait till we have the opportunity to have those discussions, I am open to that approach. Mr. Mason.
That was the best discussion of the night, right there.
Does it agree with you?
No, I do. I've had a committee working for a long time. We've had outside professionals come in. If I'm on, just make sure before I go down this road, this $2.7 million is something we decided that they were going to need as a revenue, right? So it has nothing to do with appropriations. They're spending and doing what they're doing, right? There's nothing to do with that.
Right.
So the question that the BET is going to have, I think, is waiting to hear from Nathaniel Witherell, the Board of Selectmen, or the BET, on what's the direction we want to go. So in other words, this money doesn't go to the RTM. We don't go to the RTM and say, hey, we need to give them 2.7. The RTM's already approved this. So as long as this money goes in before June 30, this fiscal year, it's okay. Right? Everything audit-wise and everything. Okay. And then we know we've had conversations to Leslie Moriarty's credit about what are we going to do in February for the additional deficit that they have. Are we going to backfill it all in 1 year or in a series of steps? I don't know. I haven't decided. I haven't thought about it.
The negative fund balance.
The negative fund balance. And I'm game to that. Whatever conversations we have then, we'll figure it out. But somehow, I guess the words I'm looking for is how do we put this in a big package? How do we tie all this together and come up with are we doing anything different up there? Are we not? Are we going to live with this? Are we not? What are our plans? And that's sort of the time. When do we have that? When do we do it? How do we put all those pieces to the puzzle together at one time? Because I think that's what we want to do. We as in us.
I'm not sure that it would package quite that easily.
I didn't say it would package that easy. I'm having the challenge of creating the package. So that's the thought on how do we do this.
Ms. Harkins.
So I believe the condition has been met. They basically delivered their response. And so that's all our conditions said. Maybe it's lessons learned on how we should write a condition, but the condition has been met. But quite frankly, the Budget Committee, as we know, only recommends the release of a condition. We don't actually vote to release a condition. So I would probably be ready to vote on a condition next Monday at that point in time. But, I would like to have the opportunity to have my BET colleagues who've been on the Witherall Strategic Planning Committee look at these responses and, provide any input, whether, they're satisfied. That there's some very crisp answers here. There's also some, I think, it's also confusing. I can't tell between what's an answer and what's a bullet point done by the two separate consultants. Sometimes it's a little confusing. So I actually would, like to hear from, at least 5 or 10 minutes from someone who's put this form together. And, also from my colleagues that have been on the special committee. But given that we do that, or if that is possible at the next meeting, I don't know, depending on what the chairman wants, I think I would be prepared to release the condition at that point in time, because the condition was deliver a report. and this is exactly what it did. So, but again, I would like to hear from my colleagues as well as here. So I'm not ready to move on this tonight, but I would be ready to move on this and not wait till February, to be honest, because from my standpoint, it's been done. It was delivered.
Mr. Raymer.
Yeah. Peter, I had a couple of questions, Pete. Of course, the $2.7 million is a part of the revenue side of their budget. So without the funds available to them, there could come a point in time at which, from a cash flow standpoint, they're having difficulty meeting their operating obligations or not.
They're currently in that position. They ended the year over $7 million owed to the general fund. I think it's 7.5. Let me just check now. This is simply an accounting transaction.
Right, we appropriate the full operating expense.
Yeah, they're already in a negative cash flow position
So
right now.
whether or not this is approved now, or whether or not it's approved somewhat later, I don't mean forever later, but somewhat later, it doesn't affect their operations, it doesn't restrict them.
No, they have a fully appropriated budget they're spending against. This is on the other side, the revenue side.
I don't disagree that the condition has been met. I don't seriously think that we're going to learn a great deal from them over the shorter term, meaning some months. I mean, I think that there's a number of hurdles for them to work their way through. They have a new financial management. They have a new director of nursing. They're about to get a new executive operation, meaning Alan Brown is leaving. There were some errors and things, I think, in the old management, some of which they're still working their way through. HDG produces a report that makes a series of recommendations. They're in the process of exploring some implementation. They're going to discover that some of the implementation doesn't work probably as well as they hoped it might. With the new management, I think these people seem to be excellent, but even with their excellence, they'll make some mistakes. They're new, and there's going to be some lessons learned from mistakes, which they'll make once but not twice. I mean, I think there's going to be a halting process over the upcoming months, and so I don't see any great epiphany coming, but nevertheless, my inclination is then maybe to hold back at least for a few months on the release of these funds, even though the condition has been met. The fact that we impose a condition, the fact the condition is met, doesn't necessarily obligate us, it seems to me, on a time restriction to be instant with our release of the funds. I think we have the right to be thoughtful about it. That's what I'm proposing to do in this case.
I would also, I would say that any department and any organization like Nathaniel Witherell will come and talk to the BET when we ask them to talk about it. We don't need the condition in place or to have that conversation. I think we have gotten bits and pieces of information about Nathaniel Witherell over the past 6 months or so, and it doesn't help us understand what our expectations really need to be, short-term, medium-term, long-term for Nathaniel Witherell. Having a conversation, to be honest, about this report isn't going to get me to that place either. I'll learn a little bit about some tactics, but I don't understand how that fits together. My inclination today was to vote on this and to recommend release of the conditions. They've met the condition. However, that doesn't end our discussions and conversations with Nathaniel Witherell. So just to have it on the record, I'd like to make the motion to recommend release of the conditions. And then the BET chair can determine when and how to take that up. Mr. Mason, yes.
What I've seen in Nathaniel Witherell in the past is we get confused of the numbers. That $7 million number is as of what date?
It was June 30th on a GAAP basis.
But that does not include the 2.7 million from last year. So it's not,
That's the exact question.
it's
Whatever she
not,
just
it's
asked
4
you,
million.
That's the question.
The answer is 4 million. It's actually 3 million contribution we made.
The $7 million in cash flow is not necessarily the negative fund balance. They ended the year about $4 million negative. In addition to that, they don't collect all the revenues in that month. So therefore, from a cash flow basis, they could actually break even, but they're still going to be in a deficit cash-wise because they didn't collect most recent month's receivables yet. So the $7 million is the $4 million deficit plus the difference between what they spent and when they collect
4 million we have to make up in February, or have a
Let me
plan
just-
for it.
I was trying to answer Jeff's question, if I could use the dial-a-ride, for example. It's not the same situation where they needed the cash to pay their payroll, et cetera. This is not the same situation for Nathaniel Wheeler. They're not going to miss payrolls or anything like that as far as operating. So that was.
Because they're a
yeah.
town department head, they have a list of authorized expenditures. Okay, June 30th, the number's 7 million. Does that include last year's 3?
Yes.
No. You said there's a 4 million hole.
After the three from last year.
So it's 4 million, it's not 7 million.
4 million.
So it's 4 million. That's 4 months ago. If we put the 2.7 in right now, where would they be right to that?
Well, if they're on budget,
Which
They
we
would
know
be
they're
at-
not.
If they're on budget, they would be at 4 million in the hole. But-
Right now, you know how we do the do-to-do-froms, where the general fund pays the bills for all the other funds, OPEB, et cetera? Right now, they owe the general fund today $7.5 million, cash. So we're confusing you a little bit when you're talking about fund balance, and we're trying to answer the question of, do they need the cash today? The cash,
I'm
if
not
we
asking
did the
about needing it.
transaction
You're not
today,
asking
all it's
cash.
doing is, it's knocking down the 7.5 by
They have
2.5.
receivables too.
Yeah,
I'm not,
yeah.
let's try again. June 30th, the town gave them, prior to that, 3 million. After June 30th, they're expecting the town to give them 2.7.
3. 2.7 is a condition, but we budgeted 3.
I'm sorry, 3. So what is their position if you take receivables, liabilities, and cash to owe that they're expecting here? What is their position?
Still negative cash flow.
So let me try to answer, and then you tell me whether this answers your question. You can tell me where I'm wrong. They were at a negative 4 million at June 30, 2019. If they make their budget, they will be at negative 4 million in June 30, 2020. The 2.7 is assumed to have been contributed to get to a zero performance for fiscal '20.
Part of their receipts.
Actually, it's 3 million that is budgeted from the town to get them to a zero performance for fiscal '20, a break-even performance.
Mike, your question is really, how are they doing? Right? Are they on budget?
Because people hear this number of 7 million and they don't realize, whoa, 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 whoa,
It's
whoa.
formed.
Yeah. There, well, that is a question.
Right, and we don't have
We don't have
current
the-
answer to how they're doing so far this year. We had some conversations about that in October, and there was some good news and some bad news, but it never really got netted out to a dollar
The
amount.
reason I'm saying this to you, and thank you, is let's just say the numbers are real 4 million. Okay, after the town's contributions at June 30th,
We need an
It is a
additional
real
4
4 million.
it's negative 4 million.
An additional, not the
Right.
current.
Correct.
Not the existing.
Is that 4 million in the first 4 months growing? Not staying the same?
So the 4 million
Growing.
is fixed, right? 4 million is the deficit from last year's
Correct.
account.
But it's on books.
At some point, the BEC will figure out how to fund it and pay it back.
So-
Yep.
Your question is, are they accruing expenses beyond their budget? So therefore, having another deficit that will need to be funded. And until this is the answer that they've historically given us, they'll make it up. If they are, they'll make it up another time, and they won't know until it's all over in the end. We don't have that information. No.
But I do understand.
Actually, we did get some information, because in our minutes that we'll be approving later this evening, last month, it says, Board Chair Simon stated it will be a challenging year for Nathaniel Witherall, which already has incurred $335,000 of unbudgeted expenses, for which he provided the detail. And he went on, goes on in the detail there. So we know that at least
It's a challenge.
it's a challenge.
Hearing your conversation, knowing that the strategic planning committee has several other meetings planned, I'm not inclined necessarily to put this on the agenda for Monday, even though it would just
question is whether or not to take it off the agenda and have Mr. Simon not come on Monday.
Sounds like the census will know more later, and that whatever we do on Monday, at best doesn't mean much, and it might argue
Takes
might
its
be
time.
premature.
And I think it harasses him. Can I just be sure I understand what was said about with the dollar figures? Were this facility to come in on budget at the end of the current fiscal year, we'd finish the year with a negative fund balance of $4 million. And that assumes in it that it will have been funded for its operations 2.7, not 3. 2.7, I think the number is. We appropriate 3, but the number in their budget, I believe, is a receipt from us of 2.7.
3.
3.
There's a disconnect. For some reason, we budgeted, they're going to get 3 million, but the condition was 2.7.
So when
So
you
there's a
take,
disconnect
when you
between-
take the current budget and make the assumption, suppose they come in right on the budget, that when you say that they'll at the end of the current fiscal year that we're in, they'll finish the year at a negative fund balance, an accumulated negative fund balance of $4 million, and that assumes that they will have spent, we would have contributed $3 million to their operating funds for that budget to come in at 0, leaving that negative fund balance that I spoke about.
Correct. On July 1st, on a budgetary basis, they started $4 million in the hole. If they break even, that's with $3 million, and disregarding the comment that was just made that they're running behind,
Right.
if you're making the assumption they break even, they're going to end at $4 million
Right.
in negative on a budgetary basis.
Are you receiving any feedback at this point from the auditors on what they're expecting
No.
from us? That you won't be hearing that until December or beyond, right?
No, but we've been down this road before with a slightly
I
higher.
recall that.
They put it in the management comment.
Present a plan.
We had 2 outside sources. There was the auditors and the credit rating agencies, and all they want from the town is, do you have a plan? And
And a plan reads 1, 2, or 3 years, right?
well, what happened for, I guess it was the end of the June 30th of 15, which would have been the 16, 17 budget, I guess. We gave them $7 million. It was like 6.9 million.
I recall.
So
I'm trying to get a
that was the
sense-
plan.
I
This,
don't have the experience you do with the auditors or with, frankly, people who review our books. I mean, presenting a plan means the plan to have over 1, 2, or 3 years to pay off the accumulated negative fund balance.
yes,
right?
yes.
It could be 3 years. It could be 1 year. It can't be 5 or 7 years.
The risk you're taking is kicking the can down the road,
They
and it
continue to accumulate more
exacerbates.
and more
It gets,
negative fund
in other words, your plan is, say, 5 years,
Right.
and then all of a sudden, they didn't break even this year.
or the next.
And then it puts them in a deeper hole this year and next year, and all it does is,
Them in a deeper hole.
yeah.
It puts us in a deeper hole.
And then you're in trouble with the auditors and the credit rating agencies in year 2, when you demonstrate that your plan is not accurate or it's not a good plan.
So your recommendation, Mr. Controller, would likely be to be presenting a plan to resolve it over 2 years?
2, yes, I would say 2 years, yes.
Thank you. That's a question I'm going to ask again in February.
All right, so, I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion, but general agreement that we probably want the full BET to act as we have those deeper conversations about Nathaniel Witherell's role. So I made a motion, I'll withdraw the motion at this time, and we'll keep it on our agendas to act on in the future. There was no old business, new business, project closeout form. I mentioned the concept of this at our last meeting, and still haven't done a lot of work on what an exact form would be, but I wanted to just explore the concept a little bit more, get feedback, see whether it's worth pursuing. As I said, the goal here is to have an additional step in the process for our capital appropriations, and that is to have a final closeout form. 3 purposes. One is for accountability. That means that both the BET, the RTM, and our finance department has information on what was completed, both in terms of project scope, timing, and cost. There would be official documentation about that, so we have paperwork to follow on on projects from the beginning to the end, see the summary of spending and duration and versus budget. And then just planning, we can ask for information on when reinvestment might appear in a future capital plan and understand whether our maintenance expenses really covers what we need to do for our expenses. So really, the rest of this thing just listed those types of things, information to be provided. It's not going to necessarily be easy for our departments to do, and there's some judgment that will have to be made. But I think having a documented process when a project is complete, what was done, would be helpful to complete our record keeping. So just wanted to get people's reactions to that. Is this worth continuing to pursue? Ms. Tarkington?
So I think that it puts forth a lot of different ideas, goals, et cetera, and I think that that it's good to look at these things. And I would suggest, though, that the format be simplified to be perhaps an Excel spreadsheet format, so that it's simpler and easier to read. I would also suggest, I would like Pete and Roland's input to this too, but rather than sort of saying this is, something that's sort of permanent, the way we do some things, that we do this on a trial basis, like for 1 year or something, to begin to see, again, lessons learned. What are we learning? Does it take a lot of time to do when there's a lot of other projects? But I think there's a lot of information here. I think frequently we don't follow up on whether we get the reimbursements on bridges or whatever, they happen to be, and how those reimbursements relate to the original one. So I think that the process is good. I would suggest that, the format be simplified. And then, if it makes sense over the next, say, a trial period of 1 year or maybe even 2 years, they then be incorporated into the CIP sheets so that the CIP sheets get updated on a project and you begin to see the whole project, together or something. I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
you get started. But you would have lessons learned after 1 year, then maybe you want to modify it and do it a second year. But I think it's a good idea, and I think that there's a lot of tracking here that perhaps we're not diligent. I mean, we do a lot of work here. I want to give all of us credit. We're all volunteers. But I do think that it puts into, it forces the documentation process that I think is excellent.
Mr. Raymer, did you have comments? No? Mr. Mason?
I have, for a long time, been a big proponent of closing out projects. There's a lot of strings, some you can, you can't. We need to do something like this. We need to do it on a trial basis we need to get a hold of a department, because people really need to learn how long it takes to go from concept to completion. It was 2 meetings ago here. Al Manelli gave that. That was phenomenal. Justice Leano could do the same thing, I'm sure. People have to understand.
Al Manelli was telling us he's coming back for more later on.
The point
I don't want to
is,
hear that all the time.
the point I'm trying to make is, people, you have to understand. I mean, you want to do something, it just doesn't happen so fast between land use and everything. By tracking this, you'll start telling that story.
You'll be able to see it. We have bundling too, where 90% of the project can be done, but that last 10% takes another 2, 3, 4 years to close out, so this thing carries on. So we all,
know that.
yeah, so there are a lot of issues. It may not be great information,
We don't have to do it the whole town. Just do a little
Do a
pilot
trial.
program.
And I asked, I didn't get to speak to you to see whether you had comments. You laughed the first time I mentioned this to you, so we'll see. Where are you tonight?
Wait for these to close out.
Talk to them.
Whoa, whoa.
You're pretty good.
So
I
are
don't know.
we. So are we. I mean,
They're
we-
going to spend that money. They told me they're going to spend that
That's
money.
them.
$46,000 left. Okay, so, well,
But you saw New Lab, right? I handed out at the RTM.
What's that?
What's the number? At the RTM, I
$1,000,004.
handed out that
oh,
document.
there's another reimbursement? Is that what?
No, the New Lab is done. and when they get their final reimbursement, they're going to be 1.4 underspent. That was what I handed, I think you came in a few minutes late, you were sitting with Beth, and I handed it out because Kim Jordan had it for me to hand out because it didn't make the package. So I was handing it out that night.
they have the
But,
COO yet?
so over the next month, I'll talk to Roland further about how to get this next, maybe we'll can try and put this in a better format and select a department or a series of projects or something to work on a trial basis. We'll figure out a rollout plan. But we'll appreciate the report, the help of the finance department. But thank you for that feedback, and I think it's worth a try. The next item on the agenda is the chair's report. It's really the committee chair's report I should have put down. I just wanted to identify or that I had been invited to 2 meetings to discuss and present the context and the information that's included in the fiscal year budget guidelines. This was after the full BET had approved those guidelines. The superintendent and her staff invited me to a meeting, and to that meeting I brought Jeff Raymer of the Budget Committee with me, and then the department heads, the town administrator held a meeting with department heads, and to that meeting Ms. Tarkington came with me. The objective really was to explain the BET's expectations for the budget guidelines and the conversations that are expected to happen in February, and the context that the full BET is looking for the full town budget. The one issue that was identified that came out of the department head meeting is the impact, to plan for the impact of the change in minimum wage, and that is something that we have to look at, especially for the departments that are relying on part-time labor. All departments kind of nodded when they heard about the challenge it is to meet these guidelines. We emphasize that it's not a status quo budget. It really is looking at changes to be made. So that's the end of my report. The next item on our agenda is approval of BET Budget Committee meeting minutes of October 15th. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Ms. Tarkington?
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Any comments? No. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0. Thank you. And a motion to adjourn
So moved.
at 6:39.
Second.